human-centered design lab based in Sydney, Australia. He has worked as a product designer and researcher for over a decade. During that time, he has led design and research teams in education at the University of Sydney, in agency at Special Design Research Studio, and in large organizations like Macquarie Bank, where he was responsible for leading design research for personal banking products. Liam's research on design process and practice has been published internationally and at Australia's leading human-computer interaction design conferences. He is passionate about using innovative design research methodologies to design incredible product experience, starting first by understanding people. Now we move on to a more of a robotics person, who is Heather Doig. She's a PhD student with the Australian Centre for Field Robotics at the University of Sydney. She's researching how machine learning can be improved to interpret images of the seafloor to better monitor and protect the underwater world. Before getting into data science and machine learning, Heather worked in technology and operation management at Macquarie Bank and Reach Out, Australia's leading online youth mental health service. When not researching the ocean, she enjoys being on it, in it, or even just near it, except today. And we have Naila Mukta. She is currently working as a data scientist at the University of Sydney. With over a decade of experience in both industry and academia, she has profound dedication to the field of AI and its diverse applications. During her journey, Naila has leveraged machine learning to enhance embedded system security and optimize learning and teaching experience. Naila actively advocates for diversity and inclusivity and is part of the numerous Women in STEM groups. Presently, she is serving as the chair of IEEE NSW Women in Engineering Affinity Group and vice chair of IEEE Computer Science NSW chapter. Naila's contributions have been recognized with several prestigious accolades, including the esteemed Global IEEE Women in Engineering Inspiring Student Volunteer of the Year Award. Now that the introduction is over, we'll jump into a couple of questions on AI, so that everyone gets comfortable and me stop reading like a script from here. So I think I'll start with Liam. So you work on human-centered design lab. Mm-hmm. What's your insight on AI being used for human-centered designs?
Oh yeah, for sure. When I was working at the University of Sydney, I was working in a lab called the Designing with AI lab. And in that lab, we were focused on human outcomes and human-centered design as a process for designing products and services. And we were combining that way of looking at the world with the advances in modern machine learning and AI technologies in general. And so in 2014, 2015, that's when I first was introduced to this kind of generative AI space and problem through a academic community called computational creativity. And it was a really fascinating thing. It was really amazing space, this kind of idea that we could use algorithms of many different kinds to extend or augment or enhance something that a human was doing. And that was my first introduction. I really began to think about things like creativity. What does it mean to use an algorithm to help me compose a song, to help me to autocomplete a sentence? These are very fundamental kinds of things, and it's from those product propositions, those kind of questions about what does it look like to extend, augment, and enhance something that I already do as a human with an algorithm, that I really kind of got engaged in and thinking about product design in that space. And so it kind of all stems from there. So I really feel like I've been very consistent in that interest all the way up to today. I'm still very, very fascinated in that same problem, is that I think that we've now seen a huge explosion of generative AI tools, and that's been incredible to watch as someone who's been sitting in that space for so long. I just can't wait to see what people do with generative AI going forward as well. So if I had any insight, it's to say that generative AI problems are very human-centered ones, and so they are super fascinating. Could talk about them forever.
That's awesome. On contrary, Heather, you work on robots, and specifically for underwater in Australia. Yep. And you work with fieldworks and actually deploying robots underwater. So how is your experience with using AI but not for like human-centered applications, but for like robots?
Yeah, sure. So I'm doing a PhD, a bit like Avi, in the same area at the Australian Centre for Field Robotics. And I work with the Marine Robotics Lab. So Australia is great because we're spending money on monitoring the Australian coastline to make sure that our ocean environment is, staying healthy, and looking at how things like overfishing, pollution, climate change are affecting the ocean. And so what we do at the lab is we have autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs, that take regular photographic surveys around the coastline. And so they're taking, it looks like a torpedo, so like a almost 2 metre long yellow torpedo, and it can go down and automatically survey a section of underwater environment. And it takes stereo photos, and it's taking thousands of photos. And then the marine scientists have a look at those photos, and they're trying to have a look at what species are present and how much of that species is present. And they monitor that year on year. But the problem is it takes a long time for the marine scientists to look at all those photos and really identify what's in the photo. And so what my research is doing is how can we use machine learning to interpret those photos automatically and get much more information from them, and then free up the time for the marine scientists manually going through these photos to do more constructive things. So it is from a robotics point of view, but I think it's human-centred as well. So it's about protecting the environment and the ocean environment, which I love.
Awesome. Naila, you work in an industrial kind of a job, but in an academia setting, which is like a data scientist. What is your perspective on AI with respect to being applied on data science?
Sure, yeah. So currently I'm working as a data scientist, as you said, in the academic sector, and it seems very strange that in academia, why do you need data scientists at all, right? So it's quite surprising, but it's good to know that AI is everywhere now, right? So in every application, there are numerous applications where AI is coming into play. So just to look at that, what is AI roles in data science, let's go back to see what data science is. So as part of data science, it's like it goes back to 2-3 decades, more than that. In 90s, when we used to do data science, we didn't call it data science, but it was there getting the data, analyzing the data, and then performing some analysis on top of it to develop a product or to do marketing and stuff like that, right? And how long it used to take us to do all that analysis, it was like years of work. With introduction of AI, that thing is now automated. So the work which was taking years to do, now that can be done in few weeks or few months. That's what we have achieved with AI. So AI combining with data science is quite powerful tool. And as part of my academic role, as you said, what we are doing is that we are trying to improve the teaching and learning experience for students and teachers. Now you'll ask, what exactly are we doing over there? So what we are doing is we are working on different applications which can help lecturers to design their lectures in a way which are more interactive and appealing for students, helping them in learning. We are working on projects where we can identify which student needs help and highlight that student to the lecturer so he can intervene earlier in the semester rather than after 2 years you are like, this student didn't pass, what could we have done? So instead of waiting 2 years for that student to think about his progress, we are doing that just at the start of the semester. If he needs help, it'll be highlighted and the lecturer can intervene. At the same time, we are helping lecturers to identify if researchers, to identify if their research area has impact in future, to forecast that the research they are working on, is it going to be helpful or not? Like, if should they divert from the research area or not? So these are kind of projects we are working on with regards to AI, and that's my role, what we do. So I think AI is everywhere, and it's just like as we now use that term, like Silicon Age, we say that it's advent of AI age. So I think that's what we are doing now, age of AI.
Now, given the bloom of AI, right, what do you think is like the future scope with like data science? Like, what's next?
Yeah. As I said, it's like, age of AI now. And I think AI is everywhere. AI is everywhere, and we can't stop it. And if some company is not using it, I think they are doing something wrong. And I think they are going to become obsolete, like, other phone companies who become obsolete because they didn't follow the trend. So I think it's not like gloom or doom like it shows in movies. Okay, it's going to be a crisis of AI. It's never going to be a crisis of AI. I think AI is there to help and make our life easier, and it's going to do that in future as well. For example, I give you an example. I'm sitting here right now, and while leaving home, I just turn on my RoboVac, and he's cleaning the home for me right now. So that's the best example of AI I can give at the moment. But apart from that, the power of AI, I can give you another example. When I was doing my PhD, so during my PhD, I was working on secure applications. So prior to my PhD, I was working as a security engineer, and part of my role was to develop those secure applications. So while I was developing those secure systems, I was like, oh yeah, we are developing a secure system, unbreakable. Why not? We are using a NIST standard. We are using a strong encryption algorithm. We are using all the good practices. So it is secure, right? But when I was doing my PhD research, it turned out, nah, nothing is secure at all. We can use AI to break the system. And to break the system, it was surprising that at times I just need few traces, like few amount, very small amount of data to break the system. So that's the power of AI, and I think it's everywhere in all the application. It's like, it's going to be in every sector. You pick up healthcare, you pick up car industry, you pick up household, it's going to be everywhere. But I think, I'll just add to that, that we need to learn how to bring in regulations with regards to AI, how to adapt to AI. Like we talk about ChatGPT, right? And we talk about that it's going to impair learning, that students are copying essays from there and stuff. But now there is anti-ChatGPT, so which can actually see the plagiarism if you have copied from ChatGPT or not. So we need to adapt. We need to learn, use AI, but use in a manner which is ethical for us and others. So yeah, AI is the future, and I mean you can't deny it.
I'm not sure if there's going to be a meme in Twitter today saying how many times you said AI, and if it is more than Sundar Pichai or not on their Google extended event.
We'll be using AI for that, right?
Now, Heather, what are like the challenges you face, like when it comes to like AI or machine learning, or like, you know, when you train your model for underwater robots? Because I'm assuming like the images are going to be really like the signal to noise ratio might be hard, or like it's underwater, like I can't even see when I swim. So what is like training a model in underwater like?
The challenges for my research, there's a few, and I think the first challenge that I hit is the lack of data. So with machine learning, you're really taking data for the model to learn how to do whatever task. So if you're trying to teach it to identify a piece of coral, you want to show it lots of photos of that coral and say this is the type of coral. But the problem is I've only got a couple of hundred examples, whereas ChatGPT's got the whole internet to learn off, or Palm. And so there's very small amounts of data to learn from. And so my research is looking at ways that I can sort of tackle that problem without having to get a whole bunch of marine scientists to mark photos with coral. And so it's kind of an ongoing challenge in a lot of spaces, particularly in robotics as well. And they're looking at, I was at the International Conference for Robotics and Automation last week in London, and they're looking at ways that they can teach robots to do tasks. And if you saw Avi's talk this morning, you saw an example of a robot learning to pick up a Coke can in a kitchen that it's never seen before. And so there's a challenge on how can you leverage existing data without having to annotate it or say what's going on, so that you can teach your models. I think another challenge is compute power, just getting enough GPUs to do your work. In a research lab, you can't afford to use a H100, latest NVIDIA GPU. And so how can you scale down your problem so you still make a meaningful impact, but in a smaller way? So we heard this morning about the new Palm model and different sizes of language, large language model. You can do things like, just choose the smallest version of it. It won't be as accurate, but you'll be able to run it faster. It's probably cheaper. And so you've got to sort of just adjust your mindset to how can you scale the problem to make it easier to attack. when you don't have those large, the large compute value that the big tech companies have. So how can you make your indent, in the space? I think that the last one for me is just how fast this stuff is moving. I'm looking at a little area, so domain adaptation. How can I update a model when I don't have a lot of data? And there's just new changes happening. Every 6 months when there's a major conference, there's a new update. There's a new change, and so I have to keep up to date with those. Adjust what I'm doing. But then there's also, off to the left, there's a new change. So transformers is a part of architecture that's being used in language models. And recently, in the last 2 years, that got adapted to vision and to computer vision. So how do I then start to incorporate that in? And you sort of have to keep your eye on the whole landscape to say, there's lots of stuff going on, but which is the one that I need to really think about, how do I adapt it into my research? So I think that's probably going to be a challenge for everyone, as developers, as data scientists. How can you keep up with that speed of change?
That's actually a good one too. Yeah. So what are the future challenges you find, given in like the generative AI and the hype around it? Like, are they going towards like there's a lot of creation going on, but what are the gaps you kind of see, and what are the challenges you see in them, and what's the direction?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I think a lot of the time I work with product teams, and we'll talk about interaction models or interaction paradigms, kind of like how do we set up the different agents in whatever interaction it's going to be to achieve a specific outcome or goal. So in a creativity example, it's kind of general. Let's make it specific. You have someone who's painting a picture, and we have another agent in that system who is assisting them in painting that picture, generative AI system, producing something alongside them at the same time. And we have to think of ways to get these different agents to interact. And so we'll often talk about the kind of model we have between them, right? So how much does that agent know about the context that you're in? How much does it know about your intention, how much does it know about what a desirable outcome is? Like, what does good look like to that system? All these kinds of really good questions we have for, multi-agent based systems. And so that's where I see the fundamental challenges for the adoption of artificially intelligent systems successfully. For it to be successful, we'll need to have really good understandings of the interaction models that sit behind them. So we might have product designers out there who are seeing very quick advancements in algorithmic design, where we're getting advancements in very fundamental pieces of the puzzle when it comes to the algorithms we're using in machine learning technologies. But that needs to trickle up to product designers and engineers and product teams more holistically, so that they can begin to understand exactly what it looks like to design with and for these systems. And so I think that, before we even get to the point of coming up with new ideas for how these systems could be applied, we often miss the gap, which is that, we don't have good interaction models for working with these systems. And I just mentioned another example before. We were talking outside. With autonomous vehicles, we see this kind of, big push to adopt autonomous vehicles in cities and all these kinds of things. But one small piece of work that I was working on at the University of Sydney a couple of years ago was looking at the interaction model between pedestrians and autonomous vehicles. You can think of the example, you're walking down the street and you step out in front of a car, and the driver of the car, they brake and they say, oh, it's all right, you go through. And oh, okay, thanks very much. You walk across the road, all very good, right? Now, we take the driver out of that scenario, and it's an autonomous vehicle. How does this kind of interaction take place now? Like, what do we do? Does the car honk at you to let you know that you shouldn't have stepped out in front of it? Does it flash its lights at you to let you know something's wrong? Like, that's a choice. We actually have to design out that system to make sense to someone who's walking down the street. Otherwise, we just have autonomous vehicles braking all the time, or going in front of people where it's dangerous, and whatever it might be. But it's those little moments of interaction that you can bring across to ChatGPT. There's a great many examples of the interaction models that are built in through prompt-based design and all this kind of stuff. And I think that's where I really have focused my personal attention in terms of product design when it comes to AI. But I think that's also where we need to start kind of expanding out our vision as engineers and designers. You know, we need to be thinking about heuristics, the principles that kind of drive the way we build AI-driven systems.
Interesting. So I'm going to open the floor and then get some questions. And do anyone want to start? Sure.
Do you sometimes think that your work can be replaced soon by the bigger AI models? And I mean, you said the lack of data, but these big companies, including Google, may have this data or can better replace the missing data with their models. How do you think of that and still try to be motivated in the...
Sorry, I'll start, but I think I'm pretty sure last week I did see Google researchers saying they were struggling with the lack of data as well. So it's pretty much everywhere, even in the large companies. I think, does my job disappear? I think it just all moves up to a higher layer. 20 years ago, this conference was probably about machine level coding, and it just moves up to more sophisticated levels. So yes, jobs will change, but I think there will be, they'll just move up to a higher level of sophistication in where you sort of put your skill set. Someone else, Seven?
Yeah, I think it's going to bring more opportunities in any case. Yeah.
It's an optimistic team. There's a question from... There you go.
I think in the courts at the moment there's AI that's doing things in the style of other people. Any comments?
What was the question?
AI is doing things in the style of other people. So you might have a great painter and AI is producing in the same style as that great painter. Or actually I think it's music and journalism.
Sure. So I think it's
towards
the Van Gogh painting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Like copying the style of Van Gogh or something like that. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's copying the greatest form of flattery. That's what I think. But no, seriously, I think that maybe the question is how does IP and copyright function? The laws we have around protecting intellectual property function when we're using generative models and things like that could be one way of responding to that. I think fundamentally, we really need to think through what it looks like for us to more flexibly use intellectual property, and also really I think there's been great misunderstandings about what is actually happening. And I think ChatGPT has been kind of the moment where everyone started to talk about this. Everyone starts realizing, it's reading the internet, therefore it's stealing my IP, putting it into this algorithm, and then it's giving that IP back to someone, at a later date, and coming up with these side-by-side examples of look, here's the original, and here's the version that ChatGPT generated, and all this kind of stuff, and then saying, also, should ChatGPT pay licensing rights back to the, whoever's got data inside that data set, for sure. So, I mean, I think it's a fundamental problem that doesn't have one good answer, which is of course that should be the way it is, or it shouldn't be the way that it is, or whatever it might be. But what certainly needs to happen is substantially more investment in legislators, politicians, lawmakers, and the literacy that exists around all of these topics. That's where we see this stuff really begin to break down, is that the lack of literacy when it comes to the intersection of legislative principles, that's really fundamentally where I've seen, in my experience, this become very problematic. We have people who are misunderstanding or potentially overestimating, and that's what I think is actually most of the time, is actually overestimating how problematic some of these things are, or overestimating how paradigm shifting some of these things are going to be, when in reality they're actually quite incremental. And so we need legislators and lawmakers to invest time in learning more about how artificially intelligent systems function. So they can create IP laws, copyright laws, and these kinds of things that do reflect fair practice to original content creators and large-scale aggregate data models.
I've seen a couple of artists who wanted to themselves wanted AI to replicate their ideas and then come up with a song, so they're happy to share their So yeah.
Hi, the lady on the left, it was really interesting. A lot of the tech companies at the moment are getting rid of middle management, and I was thinking, how would you react to an AI being your manager, especially in the data science field?
Look, I don't think AI can replace any jobs, because at the end we need human intelligence, and any AI is as intelligent as the human that's sitting behind it is making it. So I'll not feel good about it, definitely, because I don't want to take instructions from an AI manager. But to be honest, I don't think, if your question is around if AI can replace human beings, and kind of, that's what you're asking?
Yes, I suppose rather than there being 6 managers, you would have 1 manager.
Yeah, so that would be great to have 1 manager, to be honest, taking orders from 6 of them. But realistically, we think that AI is going to replace the jobs, but I don't think it's going to take away the jobs as we think of it. It's going to make our life easier. It's going to, instead what 6 managers were doing, 1 manager would be able to do it because AI is helping him do all the jobs, but we can utilize that those resources and that manpower in developing something more better. We can utilize that resource in doing something. If I give you an example of McDonald's, when they introduced those kiosk systems where you can go and do order by yourself, right? And there was a lot of hype around that McDonald's, a lot of employees are going to lose their job, it's going to replace, and how it was. But so the revenue McDonald's generated from that, they started their McCafe, and at the same time, the excess of resources, they started serving at the tables. So I think the answer to your question, that if 6 managers are replaced by 1, I think the company is going to use those 5 managers to do something more productive. The more productive to make our life easier. And if you ask from a data scientist perspective, I like 1 manager to do that, because then he will know what he wants me to do, right?
He or she. Thank you.
Is there any more questions? There we go, yeah.
Yeah, hi. Something I've been thinking about for a while is how people are tested on their knowledge and skills, and we've seen tools that are used in universities that read through people's essays or whatever and see how much has been plagiarized. With generative AI, this is a new kind of problem because obviously the content is being generated, but it's made me sort of think a little bit about how are we assessing people's ability, and with tools such as this generative AI, you can ask ChatGPT to write you an essay and it will. Is there changes in the way that you think people will be assessed on their knowledge with tools like AI becoming more easily accessible?
Yeah, I think we need to adapt to that. You're right that if somebody is writing an essay from ChatGPT or using some generative AI and it comes to a lecture and he doesn't know it's a plagiarized one. But as I said, that there are regulations coming in place for that. We need to work around that. But but again, the thing is, you are not going to be assessed on only one thing, which is you got your essay written from there, but there are other things you need to bring in place to assess the knowledge or the skills of that person, rather than relying on one essay. And as I just said that there is anti-GPT coming as well, so to check the plagiarism. So that can be something we need to look at, as Liam was mentioning, that we need to bring in those regulations around what's the ethical use of that generative AI, what we are using. But definitely we need to adapt to that, and we need to bring in more measures how to assess the knowledge of that person, rather than just relying on the written application what they have submitted.
When I was in my final year, actually, they had a couple of months ago, basically, they had a whole course on how do you use ChatGPT to help you with your research, and what are the things that are kind of ethical and what are the things that are not. And also, like, there were like a couple of assignments we were creating for the students, and we just like made sure like it's not anymore like, hey, let's do an assignment, write like 100 words on something. Yeah. But instead, you give a code piece, and then you'll be like, I'll find the error, but also like explain the error. But like you kind of like give like an error that like ChatGPT can't find out, or like even if it finds out, the explanation has like you kind of like have a gist on like whether it is like written by ChatGPT or not. Yeah. So I think like with time, universities, at least in terms of like students, like they'll start regulating different kinds of assignments and of that sort.
I think
your perspective.
Yeah, so I obviously worked as a lecturer for 5 years or so, and designed an undergraduate degree called Bachelor of Design Computing as well, and worked in that for a long time. So I think my first reaction is to this question is to say that having someone else write your essay for you is not new. That's been happening a lot, and actually, I hope everyone realizes that it's quite actually a substantial problem for the university. It's not a small problem; it's actually quite a large one. And as a education, as a pedagogical method, I would say also potentially. Provocatively, that essays are quite a lazy way of assessing someone's ability to have understood the thing that you've taught them in any given semester. So, I think without ChatGPT, I think it would have been a good idea for those lecturers to be considering the tools they are using to assess their students' ability. But beyond that, extending out beyond that, I think that I love that ChatGPT has destabilized the way that we assess students. Love it. Because it's a mess. And we need to provoke educators into much more intentional considerations around how they are understanding what their students understand. And even the example you've provided there already shows such a brilliant, such brilliant progress, especially in the domain of computer science and elsewhere as well. And not to just always be up here saying that I'm the designer and this is the way the designers do it, but this is the way the designers do it, which is we have much more of a liberal arts focus, right? So this is about the ability to articulate your ideas, to participate in rhetoric, to actually defend your idea and talk to me about it and tell me why it's a good idea. If you can do that, then I know you understand what you're talking about, right? And that happens with code as well. If you can defend your code, defend it, you can tell me why you wrote it this way, and it's important to think about this because, otherwise this will happen, you know what I mean? Yeah. Then I know that you understand what it means. Like, it's very different to just saying, okay, write me 100 words about whatever, 1,000 words. It's quite lazy to do that. But I'll also say, it's definitely not your lecturer's fault. The university needs to resource this. They need to fund this. They need to find ways to enable lecturers to have the time to, reinvigorate assessment for students around tools like ChatGPT, which could actually accelerate learning. They don't disincentivize learning. They actually accelerate learning. And so, you've got to build the structures around it to make it work, right? But I'm so excited for what it's done to the university.
Can I add to that? So when I was doing lecturing, so we had this problem that students were copying codes. They have been doing, as you said, that this problem has been there since ever. They copied from their fellow members, they copied from internet somewhere. So the idea was we were not only assessing them on the basis of the code they have submitted, but we were asking them questions. There was an expo type thing or Viva type thing where you ask them, okay, you have done this thing, how did you do it? And why did you do it in this particular fashion, as Liam is mentioning? So there's never going to be one way of doing that. ChatGPT is going to help you, give you a starting point. But I think the hype around that it's 100% accurate or 100% perfect, that's not true either. Let me tell you that. So you still have to work hard to do your assignments.
I have 62 bugs with it. I have no idea what it's doing.
It's just a starting point.
Is there any more questions? Yeah. So we are going to take like 2 questions probably, and I'm going to wrap it. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to ask about the attitude toward AI. So like 10 years ago, we're told we only have to master the DSA, and then people told me, oh, data science is important, and then computer vision, then the large language model, and then we're now told AI will replace us in the next 5 years. Yeah, so there are so many things to learn, but the time is limited. So yeah, so under this condition, as a student, what would you suggest us to prepare for the upcoming future?
I'm going to just direct it to one person because we don't have time, and that's not going to be me. Liam, would you like to go?
No, you go.
How to prepare for the future with all this stuff going on. I think just get involved and keep up to date with new developments. Try stuff out. Kaggle is a great way to test out your skills, and think about what is it that you're adding to the role that you're doing. So it's more than ChatGPT can write a little bit of code for you, but it's not going to design the whole system, and it's not going to interpret what your users' requirements are. So think more about sort of what are the higher level skills that you bring to the role, and without removing the sort of the stuff that can be automated.
And to add to that, it's about what your passion is, right? So let's say if computer vision is my passion, it doesn't matter if AI is going to keep getting better. I love it, so I'm going to find ways to do things on my way, but better than an AI system, or try to work on AI, but still make it improve it in a sense, because I'm really passionate about the subject. So I think that has a bigger play. So if you're a student and if you're looking for what you really want to improve on, I think you just find your passion and then start working on it, regardless of how AI is being used, because LLM is there, computer vision is there, now emergent behaviors are there, but still there's going to be a gap. And that's how it has been progressing since 18 something. You're great. Is there, yeah. Yep.
So as the applications of AI in different areas are expanding, so is the perspective of what's ethical and what's not is changing for each and every business applying AI. What are your thoughts on ethics in AI?
We're going to need another hour.
I think it's giving a lot of philosophers jobs. So I think, sorry, what do I think about ethics and AI? I think that it's been, people have been working on this for many years, because autonomous driving, as a great example, has been developing over the last few years, and that just immediately brings a whole lot of ethical questions. And so I think it's actually working in parallel pretty well. I know this morning we were hearing about how Google has principles for how it uses AI responsibly. US Congress had hearings 2 weeks ago about how they're going to manage AI, which is pretty impressive, given that you hear the questions from some of those senators and they've got no idea, but they're having a go to try and understand it. Boston Dynamics, that does the amazing quadruped robots, they're thinking about, well, they've got a division which is just thinking about ethics and and regulation. So how do you put Spot into, which is the four-legged robot with an arm on it, and it can go into places like Chernobyl where people can't go, or it can go to oil rigs to reduce the risk to people. But how do they think about the ethics around those things? So I think a lot of these companies are working with ethics alongside their research, and so I think it's developing well. They're not just ignoring it. They're thinking about how does this affect people, and how do we set up our regulatory environment to support it. So I think it's actually developing quite well.
To add, in general, when you do a research, there's an ethical consideration you have to go through, and then you have to get your ideas generally accepted, and then especially if it is includes human and all. In recent years, there's a whole team that's the new area of research, which is AI ethics, and then people have been working on it, and then it's it's still in the progress, because like it's a philosophical concept, right? Like, so there's like different domain people who comes into play, and then they understand how AI works, and then there's like interpretability, how the results are like transparent and all. But it's like it's happening.